Welcome to Through the Trauma podcast. My name is Amber Larkin, published photographer, storytelling expert, visual artist, entrepreneur, speaker, and coach. This podcast was born from one question: how do I get inspiring stories of triumph out to the people who need to hear them the most? Come with me, enter my world, where lives are getting changed, heroes are getting developed, and greatness is being achieved. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Through the Trauma podcast. I am Amber Larkin, your host, and today I have with me Mr. Christopher Owens, the owner of Happy Warrior Counseling, 30 years experience as a professional Dianetics counselor, the founder and executive director of the Restored Valor Project. We are going to get into Dianetics and what that is and how that helps fix PTSD, and not just PTSD, but actually rapidly recovering from traumatic experiences. So thank you so much for being here and sharing with us today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
PTSD is it's a big thing that people really struggle with. And if anyone ever has struggled with it, they know the complexity of healing from that. And you have found a way to make the recovery faster. Is that correct?
Yeah, actually, anyone who gets familiar with the Dianetics technique, that whole idea that PTSD is complex and hard to handle is very much what I'm trying to get rid of, because it's only that impression of it is only there because of, let's say, the inefficiency of the approaches that are being offered. When you actually know how the mind stores pain, and then you can actually unravel it with relative ease compared to what people think.
Mm-hmm. So before we jump into that, because I'm very interested and I want to hear all about this, can you just take a second and kind of explain to my audience, like, what exactly is Dianetics? I'm not even sure that I fully know.
Yeah, that's fine. And there's a little bit of background I need to kind of just go over as well, because there are some misconceptions that I always have to kind of take up right off the bat. So in 1950, the book Dianetics: The Modern Science of Mental Health was written. So that's how long it's been around. It was written. Now, here's where the misconceptions come from, or where people have all kinds of ideas or opinions. Because it was written by L. Ron Hubbard. L. Ron Hubbard's the same man who later founded Scientology, right? The Scientology religion. So there are going to be people who initially think, oh, this is a religious thing, or this is like, oh, this might conflict with my beliefs or anything like that. And it doesn't in any way. You could read the book cover to cover. You won't find anything in there that would come off as religious or spiritual or anything like that. Not that there's anything wrong with spirituality, but the point being that it's strictly a book about the mind, and about how the mind holds on to pain, and how that pain alters our basic personality and causes all of the problems that we generally categorize as mental health issues, right? So Dianetics came first as a subject, Scientology came later. So Dianetics itself, like I said, it's been around since 1950. He originally wrote the book, and well, actually, if we go a little bit earlier than that, what happened was he had developed this methodology. He wrote a thesis on it, and it explained exactly how it worked. And his original intention was to just give it to the American Medical Association, the American Psychiatric Association, and say, look, you guys are in a position to do something with this thing I've discovered. Take it and use it, right? He wasn't even trying to take credit, he wasn't trying to profit from it or anything like that, right? That wasn't the point. He just wanted to help. But, as established institutions often do, is like, they're like, well, if it's important, we'll hear about it. They didn't really take it seriously. So he was advised by several of his friends, some of them in business, some of them in medicine, stuff like that, basically to say, why don't you just write a book and give it to the people directly? So that's what he did. So Dianetics: The Modern Science of Mental Health, May 9th, 1950 is when it was published. But it started this groundswell of interest and like letters, like literally bags of letters he was getting with people either saying, can you do this on me? Or can you teach me how to do this? And in an effort to respond to that, he actually started or founded the first Dianetics Foundation, which was in Elizabeth, New Jersey, shortly after that. And that foundation focused on delivering Dianetics counseling and teaching counselors how to do it. And so it just kind of, it went from there. Now, what Dianetics says, and like what the unique perspective is, goes like this. So first, just as a comparison to what people generally think about the mind today, if you were to think about the mind, usually people think of that they think of it as a conscious mind, and they think of it as an unconscious mind. And your conscious mind you think of as the part that you use day to day to solve problems. And the unconscious mind they think of as this thing that's supposed to be there, but it has all these hidden elements and motivations. But people generally think of the unconscious mind as something that's like a necessary part of you that does various things. That's how psychology tends to frame it. What L. Ron Hubbard found is that, okay, while the conscious mind, which he referred to as the analytical mind, and the main motivation that he found for all living beings is basically the effort to survive, right? So the mind itself is there to figure out methods to survive, to solve problems related to survival. But this other part of the mind, this hidden element, what he found was it actually is just a repository of all of your pain. It's all of your physically painful experiences, all of your emotionally painful experiences. And he referred to this as the reactive mind. And the way that these two things interact is kind of like, if you would imagine this, imagine the analytical mind as being like a perfect computing machine. It always comes out with right answers as long as it has the correct data. But there are hidden elements that can push extra buttons in the equation and mess up the answers it comes to. If you think of it as like a calculator and you go 1 times 2, it should come out to 2. But if you did 1 times 2 and it came out to 14, you'd be like, well, the calculator is coming up with wrong answers. But it's not necessarily that it's coming out with wrong answers. It's that when they made that calculator, someone dropped a piece of soldering on the number 7. And so there's a held down 7 on the calculator. The calculator keeps adding 7 in, so it comes up with 1 times 2 equals 14. It's not coming out with a wrong answer from its perspective. It just, you can't see all the data that's being fit into the equation. And that's how painful experiences interject themselves into our day-to-day life. Take a person who, let's say when they were younger, they got attacked by a German Shepherd, got bit real bad on the arm, and thought they were going to die. Okay, they got through that. Let's say that was when they were 8 years old. Now they're 30, and they walk into someone's house who has a little Shih Tzu, and they recoil in terror. It's obviously an illogical response because there's no way that dog can do much damage to them. Maybe they can scratch their ankle a little bit. But that response doesn't make sense in the context. What's happening is the reactive mind, it operates off of identities instead of how the analytical mind operates off of, which is differences and similarities. Right? The analytical mind can see differences between things. Okay, this is similar to that, but it's not the same. And, it can separate things out easily. Logic operates that way. But the reactive mind, what it does is it says, dog in old incident equals little dog now. Equals the pain in your arm that you had at the time. So when you see the dog now and you recoil in terror, not only might you have that emotional response, but your arm might start hurting right now in the same spot. This is true even if you didn't remember the incident with the German Shepherd at all. It can still do this too. In fact, it'll have more control over you if you can't remember it. Right? To the degree that you're aware of it, it has less hold on you. which kind of gets into later the magic of how Dianetics works to fully expose the incident, right? But not only that, but let's take another thing. So it could be, let's say, when you were attacked by the German Shepherd, there was a Harley Davidson motorcycle that drove by while you were being attacked. So you had that loud noise that a Harley makes, okay? That will also equal the pain in your arm and will also equal being attacked by a dog. So let's say you're older. Forget about seeing a dog. Let's say your next door neighbor, a new neighbor moves in, and this person drives a Harley. And they got friends that drive Harleys too. So a lot of times they come around and they bring their motorcycles and they hang out, stuff like that. So you hear a lot of this Harley sound when you're in your house. Don't be surprised if you start getting, let's say, an eczema condition on this arm, right? The arm hurts all the time. You have weird skin conditions. You don't know why. The doctors can't figure out why you have it. And you don't even realize, you don't even associate it. But it's connected to that incident because that incident is saying you're being attacked right now every time you hear that noise. So that kind of gives you an idea of like the logic. It's kind of like the reactive mind, you could say, thinks like an idiot, right? It just everything equals everything else in a painful experience. Not only that, but then if there's similar experiences to it, those can end up locking into each other too. So you might have a chain of incidents like that, and they can tend to interlock with one another. Anyway, that gives you an initial idea.
I'm fascinated with the mind. I'm fascinated with the way that the mind thinks and the way that it makes those correlations. And I've often wondered with triggers if this is not why sometimes we're triggered. We can have a response to something and we're not really sure why or where that response come from. You don't even know why you're mad about it or upset about it or whatever emotion it provokes. You're not even sure why that emotion is there. You just know you were triggered, something irritated you, and if you try to explain it, you can't sometimes. I don't say that I'm really familiar with Dianetics, although in my mind I was associating this with have you ever read the book Psychocybernetics, which is also a study of the brain, but different from a different angle from what I'm hearing you talk about.
I'm not familiar with it, but actually L. Ron Hubbard in some of his lectures, in his early lectures of Dianetics, had actually mentioned it as a contemporary at the time.
So that book is so interesting. I read it early on, like when I first got into really my entrepreneurial journey and reading books and trying to understand the brain. But he talks about how in that book, how someone can go get plastic surgery. And he thought, I think he was a plastic surgeon, and he says Maxwell Maltz. I had to look it up because I was like, is this the same guy? He says that people would go get plastic surgery, and he just knew that once he fixed whatever they were insecure about, that they would be happy and love themselves. And he said, but what he found is that they were not happy at all. And it's fascinating to me that the brain works like that. But not to get derailed or get too off subject, but I think that what you're saying and what you just described, like I've never thought of that as being an issue where if something's happening to you, maybe you're getting eczema and you're not sure where that's coming from, and maybe it's a response that you're not making it up, but it's an associated response. Is that what I'm hearing you say to
Yeah, well,
an
we
incident?
would call it a psychosomatic illness. It's
How
actually, a lot
interesting.
of people have a misunderstanding. Yeah, a lot of people have a misunderstanding of what the psychosomatic illness actually is. They think it means, oh, it's just in your mind. So in other words, they think it's imaginary. That's not what a psychosomatic illness is. A psychosomatic illness means that the mind is causing the body to be sick, right? But those sickness, while sometimes a psychosomatic illness, it can be a real clue if let's say you're dealing with some type of ailment and the doctor cannot detect it physically. Sure, that's a good sign it's a psychosomatic illness, but that's not the limitation of a psychosomatic illness. Psychosomatic illness can actually reach into the area where it can be detected too. Okay, there actually are a lot of ailments that there's a lot more in terms of ailments that people have that are psychosomatic that people just don't think of. Like, for example, there's three elements, let's say, in which the mind could affect you. So you have, when you talk about illness, you have predisposition, precipitation, and then prolongation, right? So you could have a psychosomatic, you could have a factor in a mind, in a painful experience that predisposes you to injury or illness in a certain area of your body. You can have a psychosomatic illness that precipitates one, this brings it on. You can also have a psychosomatic factor that is prolonging one. So, for example, prolonging would be, let's say you get in a car accident. Well, the car accident and the injury to your back was real, but the fact that you can't heal from it can be psychosomatic. The fact that, for example, the memory of the injury often continues to tell the body that it is injured still and won't let it respond to traditional or treatments. So that can be an issue. So so people need to kind of expand their view on psychosomatic to realize the mind can play many factors in the case of illnesses or injury.
So you work with this to help people overcome PTSD. I'm very curious as to how you make the process faster.
Sure. And actually, let me make one comment about, I actually never say brain. I always say mind.
Okay.
And the reason why is because the idea that it's all the brain is what has allowed psychiatry to have such a dominance in the mind where it really does not belong. There are people who are there are so many things that people tend to default think the brain is it because they don't know what else to say is doing it. And what I would suggest, this is just a general thing. I'm going to dive a little bit into the idea of spirituality slightly for a second, just as a general concept, just as food for thought for people out there. Now, this argument will mean nothing to an atheist, so you guys will just ignore this. But anyone who's spiritual in any sense, I don't care what your belief system, if you have any belief in life after death or whatever, think of it like this. I always like to point out, if you believe that the brain is the source of your thoughts, your memories, your emotions, and your consciousness, and if you also at the same time believe in some form of life after death, whether it's heaven and hell, past lives, some other version of it, right? Those two ideas are in contradiction to one another. Because the whole idea, let's say you believe in heaven, is that you believe that you can remember your loved ones, that you can be with them, that you will experience joy and happiness, that you'll be able to think and experience heaven, right? That whole idea, if you can think and emote and have consciousness after you die, then why would it come from a brain? Unless you somehow believe that it's in the brain and then it somehow transfers to something else. You see what I'm saying? It actually makes more sense that it just comes from something else, that the brain is more of a switchboard to control the body, that it is a via rather than the source of your consciousness and your personality and your emotions, that type of thing. Just food for thought.
So I have a question about that.
Yeah.
So I'm a Christian and I believe in heaven and hell and I believe in life after death and I guess I want to be sure that I'm hearing what you're saying too, because if you're saying that the brain, which is like the physical matter that's between our two ears, right? And then you have the mind, which is more of like a spiritual entity or spiritual being. Entity's not the right word.
Well, I would
guess,
just consider the mind as this a facet of the soul.
So you're not disregarding the idea of life after death. You're just saying that.
No, I'm actually arguing for it. I'm not against it.
Okay.
You said no. I'm sorry. Yeah, if that
You're
wasn't clear.
fine.
I'm actually making the argument that the brain idea comes from a materialistic, atheistic viewpoint that we're just animals.
Gotcha.
Right, and I disagree with that idea.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I just wanted to be sure that I was hearing you right because I'm like, I'm following, But it
No, I'm glad
sounds
you
very
asked.
much
I
like
didn't realize that it could be interpreted that way. That what I was saying. I thought I was communicating it properly, but no, no,
it's
no,
probably
no.
me. I probably missed the point. So
Yeah,
there you
no,
go.
no, it's okay. It's all right. But no, I actually I think that a lot of spiritual people of whatever stripe they are don't realize how much modern concepts of psychology are contradictory to their own beliefs. They just haven't taken the time to think about why that's a contradiction, right? Um, the think of it as more like this. It's like, so if there was you and you had a remote control and you had a remote control car, right? The remote control car would be the body. The remote control would be the brain, and you would be the soul,
Mhm.
right? Now, this what I'm saying right now is just more of an interesting point of conversation. It's not important relative to Dianetics. You can believe whatever you want. The therapy still works regardless of what you believe about that. But I just like to bring it up because it's always sticks in my craw that our how everything goes to the brain, and the problem with it is, see, psychology a long time ago wasn't so materialistic. It actually started back in 1879. There was a guy named Wilhelm Wundt in Leipzig, Germany, who was considered the father of psychology, who said, there is no God and there is no spirit. Man can be understood completely by his physiology. And he started that whole idea. And then psychiatry, which is really medical doctors that are trying to practice in the field of behavior, wanted, since they are medical oriented, they always want a medical reason to justify their existence and their reason for being in mental health, right? And so they want very much that idea that it's the brain. And now people, and the problem is, like, when you have that situation where I described, where you have an incident, it's one thing when you have a painful experience that you know, like your mom died and you've been depressed since she died. That's a very straight line you can draw. But when it's, I'm depressed and I don't know why I'm depressed, what often happens in our modern society is the psychiatrists get to say, oh, that's my cue. Must be your brain, man. You don't know what it is, so it's got to be your brain. So that's our job. Here's some drugs, right? And so they get to drug all those people real easily because they're desperate and they don't know what else to do. And if they don't know about something like Dianetics, they actually can find it very directly. Then they say, well, it must be chemical. I don't know what else it is. Even though there is not today and never has been any medical test that can prove that a person has a mental chemical imbalance. You can't take 10 people and do some medical test and just objectively determine these three have a chemical imbalance of a mental nature and these three don't, because the chemical imbalance idea is a made-up idea that came up from the marketing departments of the American Psychiatric Association and the pharmaceutical companies. It was never proven. It is purely a running theory that justifies various treatments. So anyway, that's why I like to point this out, because people really need to be disabused of this idea so they can kind of like snap out of all this stuff they're being told all the time about the mind.
Yeah. So I appreciate you clarifying all of that. It's a misunderstanding, and sometimes I think some of the bigger organizations want to take advantage of situations, and it's heartbreaking to me because I feel like as human beings, we are whole. There's things we can heal our bodies of, and it's so many different areas. Mental is just one of those. It's a shame that you have these companies that do take advantage and just so quick to put people on medicine instead of, let's say that there is a chemical response, right? Like I took a vaccination and then my body's having a chemical response to that. There is that, but then there
Sure.
are also natural holistic ways to kind of heal from that too. I'm curious your thoughts about Dianetics. Do you ever use this same type of treatment for something that could be caused from an environmental factor?
Well, if you think about it like this, this is a really unique difference between traditional counseling and Dianetics. So in traditional counseling, you could come in and, let's say you've been depressed about, let's say it's okay, you've been depressed since mom died 10 years ago and you've been stuck in that. You might go to a counselor and talk generally about like a traditional counselor and talk generally about how you feel about this and how it affects your day-to-day life. And you can talk on and on about this and the various ramifications of it to little actual effect. I mean, you might get, there's some benefit in just if you have someone who's a good communicator, just listening to and acknowledging you. And that can create a temporary, you know, you might temporarily feel good, go to, that in that day, someone heard you and that's fine. But if you're trying to resolve it and move on with your life so that you can be as vibrant and happy as you were prior to that experience, which is really what the person wants, then you need to be more specific about what you need to address. And the interesting thing is that with Dianetics is that the pain is right where the thing happened. So, okay, you were feeling good one day, and then your family member called you and they said, Mom's dead. And you dropped emotionally and you went into tears and you went into the grief of that. And then you did the various things you did that day. And then you went on to the next day. And then there was the funeral and all those things. Okay. All of the pain that you experienced after, believe it or not, actually is all from that very short period of time when you were told it happened. That's the impact. Just the same as if I hit you over the head with a bat, that's the impact. Okay. In this particular case, the impact was you were feeling good, you got this news, and doom, you dropped. That, even that few minutes, if you could discharge the pain out of that few minutes of memory, you can get rid of the majority of the pain the person's suffering from. And that's such a weird concept because most people think of pain as this nebulous thing. It's like, it's kind of just, it's like this cloud I'm in, and it's attached to many incidents when it got triggered. And so it's hard to like pin it down, but it actually has a source point, just as you would a physical injury. Now, sometimes it can be additionally complicated because there might be earlier similar incidents. I guess I'm getting a little off topic. Let me answer your question first, and then I'll kind of finish that thought. So you were asking about environmental factors. So if something in the environment, think about it all in terms of pain, and that there would be a delivery point where the pain was delivered, or whenever it was. So how can you have pain? So you can have a physical injury, but you could also have poison, right? That's another form of pain. In the same way, if think about it this way, you might think of it this way: getting drunk is actually a painful experience, believe it or not. It is, you overwhelmed the body with poison to the point where it dulled your consciousness and made you less aware of your surroundings. Right? It is a poison. It might not feel like, oh, it was an injurious experience because you don't think of it like that, but that's what is happening. Something does not belong in the body, and it overwhelmed the body to the point where you started to mentally change your state. So yes, you can have environmental factors and things that deliver to you that are like injurious in various ways. Even think about this. Here's another example that like traditional mental health does not think of this at all. You go to get a surgery. Okay. They lay you down and they put a gas mask on you, which is a poison that overwhelms your body, that forces you to go unconscious. Now, that poison has a use, obviously, because nobody wants to feel the surgery when you're going through it. So it's not like, I'm not saying we should get rid of, that stuff because you need it. It has a use. So there are poisons that have a use. Even ibuprofen is a poison. It has a use. What is it doing though? It is dulling the conductivity of your nerve channels forcibly so that you can't feel the signal of pain. Okay. I'm not saying that ibuprofen's not very super significant type of thing, but if something's going to knock you unconscious or dull your consciousness, that is the other element in any painful experience. There's pain and unconsciousness. Even if it's partial, unconsciousness can be partial or full. So if you fall down and you break your arm, your consciousness has lessened. You're intensely focused on the pain, you're kind of out of it. And that, to some degree, what it does is it In that dulled consciousness, it is actually a form of hypnotic trance. The things that then go in that are recorded by your mind during that time period have a strange type of force against you. Even the wording. So if I say, think about it like this. If you were in your normal conversation, if somebody, a friend of yours says, "Oh, I'm so hot," meaning they're so attractive, right? They say that around you. It's not consequential. But let's say you were unconscious. Maybe you were on a surgery table and the doctors are just bantering. They're just talking while they're doing the surgery. Somebody says, "I'm so hot." The reactive mind will take it as a literal statement. So the reactive mind thinks like an idiot. So when it takes a statement, it takes it as literally as possible. "I'm so hot" does not mean I'm so attractive. It means I'm physically hot. The response can be, when that incident gets triggered, a fever. Right? That it may not be that dramatic, but or it could just be that you suddenly feel hot when it doesn't make sense. Like it's cold room and you feel hot, and everybody's like, "Why do you feel hot?" It doesn't make any sense. Okay, it's an irrational response because it's a command in an incident. So you have the physical elements of an incident that can affect the person, and then there's also, when you have, especially with physical pain, more so with physical pain than just emotional pain, this semantic element, is even a stronger factor. But like, I'll give you an example. I had a woman who she was in a bar, and someone took a glass and smashed it in her face, and it was a flesh wound, right? So she had to get stitches on the side of her face. But she started to, after that, she'd get headaches every single night, and they were bad enough that she'd start taking Percocets to go to sleep. And this is a person who didn't like to take aspirin. That's how bad it was for her. I had her come in. We sat down and we did a session where we addressed the memory of that incident. Now, the incident at this point, it had been a couple weeks, and she couldn't remember most of it. But here's the interesting thing. With Dianetics, we know that the whole memory is there in detail. Even if the person's fully unconscious when it happened, the original incident, all the data is still there. They might not have visual because their eyes are closed, but it's all there. So we went through the incident. The session, now a session in Dianetics is a variable length of time. Whenever you take up an incident in a Dianetics session, you always finish that incident in that session. In other words, when you're done addressing that incident in that session, you will never have to address that incident again. But the session can be, like in this case, it was 3 hours, right? So it's not like, 45 minutes are up, see you next week. We don't do that, right? And a Dianetics session is done to a result, where we finish whatever we pick up.
Let me ask you this. I'm wrapping my mind around what you're saying. So if we go back to, say, like an environmental factor, or let's just say, like, have you ever heard of this where someone can have cancer and they have a tumor, and then they meditate on it or focus on that tumor shrinking, and then it shrinks? Have you ever heard of that?
Sure. I mean, there's all kinds of things like that, and in varying disciplines, stuff like that. Yeah.
Would this be considered Dianetics, or this is something totally different?
No, no. And the thing about the example you just gave would be, Dianetics is incident based. So if there was this, like, we couldn't just say, it's not like it's not like applied vaguely to, like, oh, you feel this and we just do something to it. It's more like we would need to find an incident that was connected to it and address, like, a painful experience of some sort, emotionally painful incident, and then we would address the incident, and then you'd see if that was related, obviously, right? We couldn't just say, like, somebody came in trying to address cancer, I'm not going to say, "Oh, I can cure your cancer." I'm not going to make that kind of statement like that, right? If they're terminal, they need to go to a doctor. We're not going to try to take that up. But if they're, if somebody's got, like, okay, it's like a lower form of cancer, they're doing whatever they need to do physically. Like, we have no problem with, like, regular medical treatment for real illnesses, and we wouldn't discourage someone away from getting regular medical treatment for that kind of stuff. What we would do is say, okay, we'll do what you got to do, and then at the same time we can see if we can find any mental side, and then if we can tackle it that way, great. Either
Sure.
way, either way, the painful instance we address will help in some way to get rid of them. It may or may not address that incident, that illness. It's more direct if you've got a certain thing. Like if your back's been hurting ever since you got a car accident, okay, that's pretty straightforward. Something like cancer is a little harder because it's like, I don't know how to connect an incident to it necessarily. Unless there's something obvious, like they say, well, I went through a whole bunch of like losses at this time right before this developed. Okay, well, why don't we address that pain? And then you can see if it has an effect on the physical illness, but regardless, it'll make you feel better as a person, right?
In your work, have you seen anyone that has come in with like autoimmune disorder that has maybe that's not exactly why they came in, but some of that is caused by us rethinking or reliving a situation over and over and over. Do you see improvement in those areas at all?
What we speak more in terms of is like, okay, if there are any psychosomatic illnesses, and like I said, we have a wider view of psychosomatic than most people do, then we can address that. Like, so for example, there was I'll come back. I didn't actually finish that one story with the woman who
Yeah, I'm
got hit with
sorry.
with that.
I
No, no,
interrupted you.
it's okay. But I got off track on it. But let me just finish that real fast because that's a psychosomatic thing too. The headaches she had. So in her case, I was also commenting on the language part in incidents. So the language thing can not only affect the person in their life, but it can also affect them in the incident. So in her case, we were going through the experience, and so you go over the experience repetitively, okay? But you go through it. You try to describe it and go through it as if it's happening now. There's no hypnosis or anything like that. We're actually against hypnosis. Hypnosis is not a good thing for you. But we have they close their eyes and they're going through the experience repetitively. But there's certain tools we have that can get a person to focus in on the exact points that will like unravel the pain out of it. Right? Think of it as like a battery that has a charge, and you can go over it in such a way. If you could throw a piece of metal over the two poles and discharge all the energy out of it, it would no longer have any force or power over you. It would just be a normal memory. And that's kind of like the result that you get from Dianetics. So in her case, we were going through the experience and we had gone through it a couple times, and she was going through it again, and she hits a certain point where she just kind of like has this like, she's not talking. She stopped telling the narrative, and she's like looking kind of confused. And I said, "What's happening?" She goes, "I just feel like I'm out of it." And there's something that a Dianetics counselor knows is that oftentimes if the person's manifesting something and then they say a certain wording during the session, very often that phrase is in the incident. So I say, okay, just repeat the word, repeat out of it. And she goes, okay, out of it, out of it, out of it, out of it, out of it. Oh, it's my girlfriend. We're in the bathroom and she's holding my shoulder. She's saying, girl, you look like you're out of it. Now, that phrase was strong enough to not only, it probably was affecting in her day-to-day life too, but in the session, it stopped her and made her start act like she was out of it. It just gives you an idea of like how the language is hypnotic in these painful experiences. So not only that, but when we got to the end of the incident, so like at the end of like the 3 hours, and we had uncovered all the memories, she remembered almost everything that like had happened. It was a little bit left at the end. We got the last bit of it, and this was what was causing the headache. It was two things. One was obviously, so the glass hits first and then shatters, right? So the hit is the impact. That's the headache. But why did the headache keep coming back every night too? Well, nighttime obviously was a restimulator. So you say trigger, the word we use is restimulator, right? So nighttime was a restimulator for her. But not only that, but right after she got hit, and this is like the last bit that she remembered in the incident, the last bit that was uncovered, some guy in the bar yelled out right after she got hit, "Damn, that must hurt." Now take that phrase literally, like an idiot. That must hurt. That phrase, when she found it and she repeated it to desensitize it, headaches were gone. Never had another one of them again. So that was the thing that was causing the headache, right? It was a combination of that language and the physical recording of the pain.
I will be honest with you, Dianetics, it's fascinating, but it is something new to me. Okay.
Sure.
Maybe some people understand it way better than I do. Obviously you're an expert in it, but um I it's like the things that you're describing, it's starting to fit together in all of these concepts that I've learned, but I didn't know why they were effective. So, for example, like I was watching something the other day and I come from the fitness industry. I love to work out. And I was watching this, it was like a reel or something on social media. And it said, just by going in and saying, like, I'm tired, I'm tired, I'm tired, it has a major effect on your workout versus going in and saying, like, I'm not tired. It affects you. And I've known this and I've even seen this to be true in my day-to-day life. Not just in working out, but in across the board, right? Um, but it's so funny to me because as I'm hearing you tell the story of this lady, it's like the language and even the subliminal, like the language that we don't even necessarily catch, it affects us and can affect us in instrumental ways. Is this where, like, scientifically, we're encouraged to maybe listen to stuff when we're sleeping or to listen to stuff in the background because our subconscious is picking this up?
What you're describing is a different approach that operates on different like you're right that obviously you're seeing an overlap of things in terms of like certain principles seem to blend into other principles and other disciplines. We're not Dianetics is not um, an approach for trying to program yourself to be a certain way. Okay. Which is a lot. Some of those approaches are more like that, where they're trying to listen to something. They're trying to make things sink in to make them do things, right? But that concept, I think, comes more out of the disciplines of like hypnotism, and I don't really like. While I agree with you on the point of self-talk, right? Like if you reinforce something, your decisions and in in the larger subject of Scientology, there's a term we use called postulate. A postulate is the self-created truth, right? So like you say something is a certain way and it is a certain way type of thing. So like yes, the postulates you make to yourself can have an effect on you, but that's a slightly different element. What we're trying to think, the Dianetics approach is more like this. Think of it like this. In psychology, there's often an idea that okay, a lot of times they start with the idea that you're an animal. And then they're like, okay, you're social and you're environmental, and they teach you things to be more social. And like it's the whole idea. Remember the old Lord of the Flies movie?
I don't know that I've seen that movie.
You ever see that? Okay, so if it's like in the '90s. I get maybe I'm showing my age, but the so like
No, I'm
Lord of the
right there
Flies.
with you. I just don't watch a lot of movies.
Okay,
That's
well, look, Lord of the Flies was this movie where it was basically a bunch of kids from a military school, and their plane crashes on this deserted island, and then they start to the whole idea in the story they slowly start to devolve and become more barbaric against each other and like tribalistic and all this kind of thing, right? But the person who wrote that book was going off of an idea that we are basically that way and that society makes us civilized. Okay, we fundamentally disagree with that idea. Like L. Ron Hubbard found the opposite was true. He found that the basic nature of a person is good. The basic nature of the person is to be happy, to be confident, to be forthright and able and intelligent. Even Dianetics, it's one of the things in Dianetics that's quite fascinating is that a side effect of Dianetics is people's IQ tends to rise. Right? It's not like we don't intend to try to like change IQ directly, but when you remove, it's more like the person's inherent nature, they have all of those good qualities that they're really aspiring to. Like it's not to say that there isn't a place for education. Like you can certainly learn how to do things, get skills, and and benefit from the knowledge of other people. I'm not saying that's not a factor. It certainly is. But what I'm saying is the basic nature is good, and that you don't have to teach a person to be happy. What you need to do is remove the things that are impeding their happiness, right? And that's what the reactive mind is. The whole idea is to, ideally in Dianetics, is to completely get rid of the reactive mind, where you only have the analytical mind, which is a state we refer to as clear, where you've actually completely handled the reactive mind and you just have the person themselves,
if
right?
you were to do that though, does that then get rid of the empathy that one might
Nope.
have? Like,
No, you actually have more, because all, like I said, that's inherent. we have these weird ideas, and they come from psychology, where we think that the term in Dianetics we use is aberration. You know how like in psychology they've got all of these labels for everything. They've got label for every. If you go into the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which is the Bible of mental illnesses, and the main reason they have it is because each name has a billing code. That's why they have to have them in there. All of these labels are really, they don't really mean anything for the most part. I mean, there's general terms that are useful in conversation, like depression, so we just know what we're talking about. You could even say OCD is handy as a shortcut in conversation to talk about something. But the way that they make these labels are not really based on science. They're based on a vote of hands at an annual convention. It's not like, so they have all these labels. We don't get into all those labels except for having a conversation with, the rest of society. So I refer to PTSD with you. I talk about that because people are familiar with it. Not because as a Dianetics counselor, we really concern ourselves with the term so much. We just use a general term, which is aberration, which basically means, it comes from the Latin aberrare, which means to wander from or to see crookedly. And that's essentially anything that's wrong with a person is essentially, they're trying to look in this direction and something is diverting them. They're making them see it a different way, or making them turn away from it, or not see it, or see something else. And that's essentially all that's wrong with a person are those things, the reactive mind doing that to the person.
It's a personal question. Answer it if you want. If you don't, it's okay. Are you a Scientologist?
Yeah, I am.
I think that obviously we probably have different views and beliefs on certain things. I'm just curious about how the mind is like, it's so complicated. And, you know, any little part that we can peel back and start to understand it a little bit better, I think is valuable information. I
Well, can
think
I
that,
say something about
oh, yeah, yeah, go ahead.
about that concept of about the mind being complicated? There's a bit of an analogy I like to give, and just to help people think about the mental health industry a little differently. Imagine, let's take a different industry. Let's say a mechanic. Let's say your car's making a loud noise, and you bring your car to the mechanic, and he looks at it 15 minutes and he says, "Ah, yeah, I get it. Your car's got sputter disorder. Here's what I need you to do. I need you to bring your car back to me an hour once a week or once every other week, and I'll work on it. And there's no guarantee I'll ever be able to fix your car, but we'll just keep trying. It might take months or years, and cars are so complex after all. And in the meantime, take these. What are those? Well, those are earplugs. You won't be able to hear the noise as much when you're driving. And then we'll see what we can do. If with what you know about mechanics, you would say this guy's a quack. I'm gonna go find a real mechanic. But what if all mechanics were like that? What if that was the mechanic industry? And then a mechanic comes by and says, "No, I can fix this. I'll have it ready for you by the end of the day." You'd be like, "No, this guy's a quack." No, everybody knows the cars are complex. You got to get rid of this guy. That's the mental health industry. People don't even realize how messed up it is because they're so used to it. They've been told so many times that it's hard to resolve the problems of the mind that that's the default, because it excuses away all of the inefficiencies of the industry. But there's no other industry that gets away with that level of incompetence. None. It's the only one, right? And so the thing is that, well, I can tell you as a Dianetics counselor, you can give me a person with an incident of any severity. I don't care how bad it is or what happened in the incident that they're struggling with. I can almost always sit them down in one session and completely resolve it in that one session. That doesn't mean I can solve an entire person's life in one session, right? Because if they were beaten for 10 years, that's a lot of incidents, right? So, but it's probably less incidents that you think it is, right? That's the thing, is because a lot of that 10 years there might be, let's say, 8 significant incidents and a lot of little ones where they got restimulated. So it feels like 10 years, but it was really 8 incidents. But I could still tackle those 8 incidents in a very short period of time, maybe a handful of sessions or something like that, and they'd be past it. Whereas other situations, they'd be thinking, well, this is CPTSD, this is and I'm going to be like this forever, and all the best I can hope for is to be able to cope with it. And I mean, we live in a society now where, because the mental health industry is so inefficient, and because people do not get help, they've turned to the point where, in order to cope, they now make their condition part of their identity. They say, "Oh, this is who I am. I am this. I am OCD," and it's almost like they're proud of it. But it's like a coping measure, because it's like, they're struggling with it, and so it's either they keep grading against and struggling with it, or they just adopt it, make it a new paradigm, so they don't have to feel like they're struggling against it all anymore.
Do you guys ever work with addiction? Or is that one of those things too, where it's like, if it comes from a specific trauma, which I don't know that
Oh, it
addiction
definitely. No, that
that
definitely comes from. Yeah, yeah. So there's two sides of it. So if a person is currently addicted to a medicine, or a drug or something like that, they wouldn't go right into Dianetics, because they wouldn't be able to get the session. So first we'd have to get them off of it, right? Dianetics would be good for addressing the reason why they got addicted.
Gotcha.
Okay. But there are, because here's the thing: when you do Dianetics, you can't have alcohol for 24 hours beforehand. You don't want to be currently on like pain medicines or tranquilizers, because they tend to inhibit memory, and definitely they cannot be on any psychiatric drugs, right?
Mhm.
So if someone's on psychiatric drugs, they're going to have to see a professional who can help them to wean off properly and safely before they would do this, right? But something that, so in the larger subject of Scientology, you figure Dianetics was the beginning of it, and then Scientology came shortly after as like a broadening of the subject. It was kind of more encompassing the spirit as well as the mind. Going through the 60s and 70s, given that counseling is such an integral part of the subject of Scientology, he started to face the scenario of like 60s and 70s, heavy drug periods, right? People were really into drugs at the time. So he started to run into people who had significant drug histories, and they started to find that these drug histories were inhibitive of their progress in session. Like it was maybe holding them back. So what he did was he researched and developed a program called the Purification Rundown, which uses a specific combination of exercise, vitamins, and sauna sweat out to clean because what he found was that even years after having taken a drug, like let's say you took LSD like 10 years ago, well, you've heard of people getting flashbacks, right? The reason they get flashbacks is because there are still LSD crystals in the fatty tissue of their body. There's little deposits. And so let's say the person decides they're going to get healthy now. They're going to work out. They go to the gym, they start burning that fat, and they get a trip because the LSD crystal dislodges and it gets in their bloodstream. And so maybe they get a craving, or they get a flashback, or they get stuck in some experience or something like that. So this program is designed to clean the residual toxins out of the body. In addition to things like flashbacks, these toxins can also, over time, drug use tends to dull and wooden the person, make their emotions more wooden, make them dull their thinking, things like that. So by cleaning all that stuff out, you can really free a person up. So that program exists. Now that particular program can be done in any church of Scientology, but there's also a secularized version of this. There are drug rehab centers that are specifically developed off L. Ron Hubbard's methods. The first thing they do, they're called Narcanon. Now, not to be confused with Narcotics Anonymous. It sounds similar, but it's different. Narcanon means no drugs. So Narcanon actually is the most successful drug rehab program in the world, and there are different facilities around the world. One of the biggest ones, like this, the headquarters is in Oklahoma, I believe. There's a big facility there called Arrowhead. What they will do is if let's say somebody's addicted to heroin and they come in there, well, they're going to they use a combination of vitamins that they it's called a drug bomb. It's just a combination of vitamins that helps to minimize withdrawal symptoms while they're withdrawing. They use that. There's also some additional mental type techniques that L. Ron Hubbard developed that are good for helping a person to get into the present time. get their focus to really in the present instead of in the past, which the drugs tend to do. So they use a combination of those and the drug bomb to get them off the drugs first. Then the next thing they do is they do the purification rundown to clean all the residual toxins out of the fatty tissue of their body. Then they do a number of courses and processes that help them to get to the reason why they started taking drugs to begin with. Because any drug, essentially, any addiction originally emanates from an effort to resolve a problem. Even if the problem was boredom. The person was bored and they start smoking marijuana because they have fun with their friends. They think that's cool and da-da-da. And so, and then they start kind of craving that feeling. But it's because they don't feel good in their regular life. Why does a person become an alcoholic? Well, it might have started because the person was an anxious person. They had a hard time talking to women. And they found that when they got a buzz on, they got social and they could talk to them. So it was solving a problem for them. And then they just kept using it more and more. And so, it's think about, you start that way and then they start they get drunk and they do stupid things and then they have regret and guilt. And now they're drinking for the regret and the guilt from those experiences too, in addition to the original anxiety problem, you see. So if you can resolve the original problem, then yeah, that can help with it. So with Dianetics, obviously, a lot of people do drugs because of either anxiety, they're depressed, and those things come from painful experiences.
So what about when you have someone who is, let's say they're addicted to food, or they're addicted to sex, or they're addicted to toxic relationships, or money, spending money. Like, this is kind of all classified as the same.
Well, yeah. Well, just think about it like this. Again, go back to the idea in Dianetics of aberration, irrationality, to see crookedly. In some aspect of their life, they're seeing crookedly. The evidence of it is that it creates less survival. Because remember, the mind is there to increase a person's ability to survive, not just for themselves, but for their family, for groups that they're part of. Like we refer to as the basic urge to survive. It refer to as a dynamic. Your main dynamic is to survive. If you were to look at it in a microscope, that urge to survive, it breaks down to different areas. Self, like think of them as concentric circles. You have self, and then family, sex, family, children. Groups you're part of. You want your group to survive. Mankind as a species. It kind of goes out from there. But the idea is, so if the person is thinking straight, so to speak, if their analytical mind is not impeded, then they're going to make choices that are going to improve their survival. Doesn't mean you never make mistakes, but you can learn from it and change. But if a person's continuing to do something that's hurting them, there's obviously something compelling them to do it. It could be an engram. I'm sorry, the term in Dianetics we refer to as a painful experience. We call it an engram. It's basically, it comes from a word meaning a lasting trace. So those painful experiences, like a particular incident, we refer to as an engram. So there's going to be either some incident that's compelling them to act a certain way, or there are incidents that are making them feel a certain way, and they're taking the action to counteract what that feeling is.
Sure.
Either way, if you get rid of the pain, it will have an effect on, yes, that addiction, whatever that is.
Honestly, like, this makes me want to dive in and learn a little bit more about the history of Scientology. I mean, I think that we probably have differing views on certain things, but I don't know enough about Scientologists to speak on it.
Well,
but
just so you know, as a subject, it's an all-denominational religion anyway. It's not. It doesn't have any type of negative views against other people's beliefs. In fact, it's welcoming of anyone's beliefs. So, yes, there are some concepts in Scientology that will be different than yours, and that a person might reject. So, like, let's say a Christian came in, like, there's information in Scientology about, for example, past lives. If you don't believe in that, that's okay. Nobody's going to push it on you. It's like you can just put that over there. Meanwhile, all the information about the mind, about communication techniques, about how to study and learn any subject you want, about how to improve relationships, there's all kinds of data that has been, like, discoveries and techniques that have been developed that anybody can use. Like, for example, the study technology he developed of, like, you ever get to the bottom page and you forget what you just read?
all the time.
Okay,
That's
well,
me.
Scientology study technology explains why that happens and tells you how to resolve it. Like, there's an exact thing that happens that you run into in your studies. But you could use that to study the Bible. Do you know what I mean? Those study techniques would help you to know that subject better, or whatever. Or I know of a minister, like a Baptist minister, who uses the communication course and the techniques of how to better communicate with people to better minister to his flock. It's so there's it you can the subject is not it has information, but it is not dogmatic, and it doesn't force a person to treat it like a monolith. So you can literally take what you want out of it and use that and leave the rest if you find something is in disagreement with your ideas. It's not like you have to think this, you have to believe this. There's not even like a form of baptism in Scientology or something like that. It's just like a person, if they want to call themselves one, then they are. It's not otherwise. It's not like there's not like a membership procedure or something like that. There's
Well,
courses and there's counseling. That's the main thing people do. And then there's social betterment programs like the drug rehab program, criminal reform program, morality program, human rights. There's things like that we do to help improve the society and things like that. So
well, therein again, okay, and this is a whole nother podcast for a whole nother day, but there's this whole thing too with what we just talked about with mental health, putting labels on certain things. I think religion does the same thing. We have to be careful not to fall into these labels, which even hearing you talk about it, it's like in the back of my mind, it seems so crazy. Like, why would someone want to put these labels like, I'm Southern Baptist? I'm, like, why? Why not
yeah,
just love God and explore? That's the really, I mean, I think it's the beautiful thing in life is that we get the opportunity to explore. We get the opportunity to look at things, and you get the free will to make your own decisions about how you see things based on your own experiences. Um, but you've inspired me to, I mean, I'm curious. I want to know a little bit more. I never shut anything down without, I don't want to believe things because my parents believed it, or believe things because my culture believes it, or,
right.
I like to explore things for myself. Um, but I will say this is certainly a interesting topic, and I would love to do a little more research just on Dianetics in and of itself, and possibly have you back on. So
Sure,
I'm coming from a little more educated point of view, because I think
sure,
today I was just like, oh, I've kind of heard about this. What is this? What is that? So I
yeah.
appreciate you so much just taking the time to really dumb it down for someone like me who needs that. If you had kind of a final takeaway that you would want to leave my audience with, what would that be?
Um, I think that maybe, well, one, I'd like to point them to a resource that's on my site it's a very easy way to learn more about Dianetics in detail. There is a video that was created. It's actually, well, there's a DVD out that somebody can go and they can buy wherever they can find that. It's the Dianetics. It's at the How to Use Dianetics DVD. It actually has two discs in it. One's an hour and a half. The other's 3 hours of additional information. But the hour and a half one you can just watch on my site. And I set up a specific URL for it, so anybody can just go to and watch it. It's they can go to happymind.watch, and it'll go right to that page on my site. And it's set up as like a YouTube playlist, so it's about an hour and a half total. It's set up, but it's like 15 short videos, but it comes out to an hour and a half. That's the whole thing. But it explains a lot of these principles that I was describing about how the mind holds on to pain. It gives a lot of examples. It even shows the basic structure of how a session works. One of the neat things, one of the really unique things about Dianetics is that you could actually take the basic procedure that's in that video, and you could do, like, I can do a seminar with a group of people. Let's say I had 30 people, and I could do like a weekend seminar. We go through the video, and then the basic procedure, you could pair everybody up, and you can get them to do just the basic procedure on each other, supervised. So it's really kind of like a co-counseling technique. Like, obviously they wouldn't have knowledge of all the additional tools that you can use in a session that someone like myself, like a professional, because I've been doing it like 30 years. But the cool thing about Dianetics is you can literally, with that basic procedure, you can still get pretty amazing results addressing a variety of things. And you can do it in that kind of setting, which also has the benefit of joy of helping another person too, not just receiving it, but giving someone else, Yeah, but that video, happymind.watch, is a great way for people to learn more about it that way. Obviously, there's the book. The book is very extensive, but I find that, I don't know, people's vocabulary today isn't quite as good as it used to be in 1950. So sometimes they might have a harder time with the book than they do with the video. So yeah.
And if you had to tell people kind of like how they could get in contact with you, like let's say that somebody wanted to learn more about your specific technique and maybe possibly even working with you, would they go to that same website?
Well, the happymind.watch was just a link directly to one page of my site. The site is thehappywarriorcounseling.com. So they can go there. My number's on there. There's a contact form to send me a message, or they can call me or whatever. Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
And then are you active on social media as well?
Mainly Twitter.
Gotcha.
As far as this goes, I talk on Twitter. I like to argue with the psychiatrists about the mind and stuff like that. So I kind of get into interesting conversations with them on there.
I love it. I mean, that's how we learn, right? Is by listening to different viewpoints and looking at information and comparing what's
Yeah.
you know. So I think that's awesome.
I
It's
find there's a lot of people, when they do the research on Dianetics, in addition to watching the video, I'll just put this out there because I know it's going to happen. You're going to run into stuff, and there's going to be people who are going to tell you that it's the worst thing in the world, and people they're evil and whatever, and they're going to all kinds of, because of Scientology, and they're going to try to tell all this stuff. You're going to run into that stuff. I'm just going to tell you right now. Like, I can't change the internet. There's all kinds of people out there that say all kinds of things. All I really recommend is, like, think for yourself. Take number one, what I've said today. If it does not make sense to you, then by all means ignore the whole subject, right? If something I said makes sense to you, look into it more and see if the actual information in the subject makes sense to you. And if so, you try that and you see if it works for you. And if that works for you, you could try another thing and see if that makes sense, and you could try that and see if it works. And you just proceed that way. You could have a million people tell you. It's kind of like, I find that in our society, people often don't delineate a difference between what they know and have experienced and what they have been told or what their opinion is. Like, they often say this, like, they'll hear something, they adopt that opinion, and then they state it as if it's, I know this. But there's a big difference between what you know and what you think is true. If there was a shed and the door was closed and two people walked out, and one person said, all the walls in this shed are green, and the other person said, all the walls in this shed are red, you wouldn't know which one. Now, maybe one of them looks like or speaks according to the political ideologies you like, so you decide to believe that one. But you still don't know which color the walls are in the shed, right? You just know that you think, because they agree with you on other stuff, that they must be right about the walls colors, or this person maybe looks dressed a certain way, and so you decide that must be true, or that you have a certain tone. But the only way to really know is to walk into the shed, right? And everything else is just making a guess, or your best assumption, or deciding who you want to believe. And nothing is a replacement for actual experience or actual personal observation and comparing it to your experience. And that's what I recommend.
But, even taking that example that you just said, right? Still, there's this level of like, I can walk into a place, and if I've been told like the walls are green long enough, I can make myself believe those walls are green. Like,
Oh yeah.
and it's funny because coming out of, doing business and understanding marketing, and there's so much like manipulation that can
Oh
be
yeah.
done in the mind. And the term gaslighting, which I'm sure you're familiar with, if someone
Sure.
tells you something long enough, then eventually you start to believe it. So it's
Yeah.
powerful stuff. It's
Yeah. I mean,
crazy.
we need to cultivate in ourselves this idea of um of being able to determine being able to just distinguish between what we know and what we think, what our opinion is and what we actually know from experience or what we've observed. In Scientology, there's actually a drill that you do on certain courses. It's called, there's a term L. Ron Hubbard coined called upnosis. And it's basically this. You just like, okay, so you got yourself and you got a partner who's like your coach, right? In this case. And they look, let's say there's someone standing over there and they're standing this way. You see them from this side. You say, okay, what do you see? And they say, well, I see a man. Okay, fine. I see he's got ears. Well, now hold on. Do you see two ears? No, I see he has a left ear. Okay, good. Right? So in other words, it's forcing the person to state what they actually can observe. Right? And to not and to distinguish between the assumptions they make and the observations that they make. And even like a drill like that with a person can help to sort of get them to differentiate better and determine the difference between, okay, this source told me this thing, and I know that I agree with them on all these other things. So my tendency is to believe them on this, but I don't know if that statement was true or not necessarily. I should check on it, or I should verify it, or something like that, and just cultivate that kind of, a little bit more discernment in that. Have you ever heard of the, but to your point about like people's biases and stuff, have you ever heard of the Stanford study? There's a really interesting one where what they did was they took, I don't know how many women it was, and what they did is they're gonna have them go into job interviews, but before they go into the job interview, they used prosthetic and makeup to put scars on their faces, right? Mm-hmm. And they say, so they created these scars on their faces, and then they say, okay, we're going to send you the interview, and I want you to report on how it went, and if there was any, discrimination, if anyone responded a certain way, they treated you differently because of it. And right before they went into the interview, they said, okay, we just got to touch this up a little bit, right? So they went in the interview, went through the whole thing, came back, and there were a large number of them that reported that they were discriminated against and that there were weird comments that were said to them and they were looked at strangely and all this stuff. And they didn't realize that before they went in the interview, they removed all the scars.
I knew this is where you were going with this.
Yeah, right. But they knew they had scars. And so they saw everything that they intended to see and they expected to see, in there. It's quite fascinating,
Wow. It's a lot to unpack. And I'm like, we need to schedule another interview so we can unpack this a little bit more.
Let me know. I'm happy to.
But thank you so much for sharing with us. It's a lot to really chew on, and I hope that my audience, when they listen to this episode, they'll unpack some of these things and chew on it, and just begin to see how powerful like your mind is, and how powerfully like getting to the bottom of some of these things are, which I really believe with trauma is one of the most important and vital things. Is like you have to get in there and you have to work. You have to figure out what it is that's causing. I call them triggers. What did you call them?
Restimulators.
Restimulators, triggers. But it's important.
Fine. Trigger works as well. Yeah, it's fine. Same thing.
Yeah. It's important because otherwise you are reacting to things. Situations happen, you react, you respond. You're not responding logically, you're just reacting emotionally. Thought about that a lot, but this puts a lot of things into perspective for me. So thank you so much for your time and your expertise and just sharing with us, and I appreciate it a lot.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to Through the Trauma podcast. If you have found value in this episode or believe in the mission behind what we are doing, please subscribe so that you never miss any future episodes. Also, be sure to check out our transformation project at transformationthroughtraumaproject.com, where we help inspirational stories get heard on a larger scale through multiple platforms. If you know someone who can benefit from this episode, please share it with them. Until next time.